Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, I'm Dodge, this is Bigmeks Workshop and Paint Studio, and this is part 3 of the beginner series. So on the desk at the moment you can see a whole bunch of materials that we're going to be using while we work through this. We're going to try and cover everything you need when it comes to cleaning up your model and getting it prepared for painting. Now some of these are duplicate items, like the variable of knives, but we'll get to that later on. That's just a personal choice for me. I like to use different knives for different jobs. Now the main two tools that we're going to be using as we're getting our model off the sprue is clippers and a hobby knife. We are going to be cutting up metal later on, so we'll get to that. If you're wondering how to clean up metal models, we'll cover that as well. These are my decent snips. We do have some for cutting up metal as well that have little dimples and markings in it where it's been cutting hard metals and it's damaged the blade, so you want two different sets there. And as an example of how to build and assemble, I'm going to sub-assembly the Primaris chaplain. Now we're not going to cover the whole thing here, and for the metal model we are using Infinity models because they've got some nice stuff, and building these dog warriors for that as well. On the metal video that's where we'll work on the pinning because the tails need to be pinned on. And always when you're starting your project, do look through your instructions thoroughly. I like to look through them several times, get a good grip of what's what. And Games Workshop numbers everything on these nowadays, and the illustrations are a lot better than they used to be. So as they're numbered, don't make the mistake of cutting everything off your sprue all at once without knowing where it goes, as it's easy to mix your bits up for certain model types, especially the Primaris box set. Now when using the snips, we want to be using the flat side, and we want to be pushing that against whatever it is that we cut in. You can see the blade's in a pretty decent condition there. It's always good to check that first. If you've got markings or little gaps in there, when you cut stuff you're going to fray the plastics or resins, and that's going to tear it away and make the cleanup job a lot harder than it should be. So what I'm going to do here is push down as far as I can against the model, which works better on flat surfaces. Anything where the sprue joins to a flat surface, that's the best way to do it. Whereas on this cape here, I'm going to cut a little bit further away because I don't want to dig into that. It's going to be harder to file that down. So I'm going to leave a little bit of that sprue on, and then I'm going to clean it off later on with a knife rather than risk digging into it and having to fill it out. Or fill it in. And I turn the lights up a little bit more just so you can see the marks that you end up getting while removing the model from the sprue. What we're going to do now in this next step is we're going to use a couple of different techniques to clean those up. Now this is not a Games Workshop file at all, it's a nail file. It has a medium and fine side. In the studio we like to use nail files as they are quite soft, and instead of going back and forth across that round surface on the cape, I'm doing very small circles with the medium side of this file to take that down so it's almost flush, and then I'm going to flip it over, use the fine side and do the same thing. Just be really careful, you don't want to push into this to rush the model, because then what you'll have to do is you'll have to get the milliput again later on and fill that back in. So just going around in real small motions with the file will make sure there's no hard lines in there, and you will have a little bit of texture left on the surface where you've been filing and see very tiny scratch marks, but when you put the primer and everything on there it will usually fill those in nicely. And I'm hoping that shows up on camera that we've got that nice and smooth now. You want to make sure you rub your fingers across it, because visually it doesn't work as well. You want to run your finger across it and make sure it feels smooth. Now if you're quite savvy with a knife, you can use a hobby knife to take the majority of this off, but what you want to do here is you want to cut up. You don't want to cut down into the bit of plastic at all. You want to just skim the top off by digging it upwards. Same reason that we did the file the way that we did. You don't want to dig too far into that and ruin the shape. And then what I'll do once I've cut the majority of that off, as you can see, steady little movements there. You can then file it down if need be. Now this is knife that Andy brought in. We find this one's really good for getting rid of mould lines, which I hope you can see on the camera there. It usually works better on mould lines for longer models. What could I describe that as? It works best for getting rid of mould lines on Space Marine legs and things like that, where there's a long mould line. The curvature means it won't really cut into the shape, but you can just pop that on there and twist, and the curvature just helps pull that extra sprue off. And on this particular part here, we haven't got a choice but to use the hobby knife. The reason for that is it's actually quite fragile. If we start filing away at that, we run the risk of snapping it or bending it out of shape. So when it comes to a nice flat surface like that, you just run the blade directly across it, and then what I'm doing is just scraping it with the edge of the blade there. And this will work on any plastic techniques that you've got. I mean, any plastic sprues that you've got, these techniques will work with those. Also, when assembling your model, we're now going to get onto the glue. Always dry fit your model so you know which way it goes together. That's really important. You want to make sure you've got everything the way you want and you've got it to fit. This also lets you know whereabouts on the model you're going to want to put the glue. So what you want to do is get some plastic glue. We're using the thin plastic glue from Games Workshop, not Superglue. Superglue on plastics doesn't bond as well, and it doesn't give you any time to move the model around. Refrain from using Superglue for plastics because it's really not going to work out well. There's not enough time to maneuver the model around. Once it's bonded, and then you have to clean up all the excess superglue. Now, while I'm applying this, I'm going to start with the main blob in the middle, and I'm working this into areas that you won't see. Then, as the ball of glue works its way towards the end of the sort of pipette, I'm using the very edge, and I'm going on the inside of this cloak, because what will happen is you'll get a little bit of overhang. A little bit of that glue will go onto the main part that you want it to. So always glue away from the area you want to glue, but on the inside where it's always going to be covered. That way you get less of that leakage that I see people get, where they glue it together with too much glue and it seeps out the side, and then you'd have this big gluey texture. And occasionally what will happen is someone will put their finger in it, and as it melts the plastic, you've got a big fingerprint in your figure as well now. You do want to hold that for a few minutes. How long that takes will come to you over time. So what I've done here is I've cleaned up the legs, but with this particular type of model, that's going to be really difficult to paint while it's in there. But because Games Workshop's upped their game when it comes to molds, that actually sits in there really well. So as I was saying with the gluing technique, what I will do is I'll paint those legs separately, and because you won't be able to see the top of that, I'll be able to put in the glue there, and then when it's all painted, I should be able to just pop that in and just let that set. Okay, so now I've got this bonded together. It's a good model to show you how to use filler. A lot of people use green stuff, but I find that green stuff for really small gaps like the ones we're going to fill in here, it's a bit too thick. So I use this Milliput super fine white. I'm going to teach you how that's used. Very similar to green stuff in the mixing and everything else, and it's really easy to sand, and it just fills the gaps a lot better than green stuff would, or liquid green stuff. As you can see, there's a seam here where the two parts meet, and I want to get rid of that because once it's primed, that'll show up. The problem with the superfine Milliput is that it's both white parts, so this means you will have to sit and mix it up for about 2 to 3 minutes to make sure you've mixed it properly. It's the same with green stuff. You will mix 2 equal parts, and you'll see the consistency in a minute when that's done. So I just speed this up. This also reacts to water differently. It becomes more of a paste a lot quicker, and it actually becomes more sticky when you add water to it. So what I'm going to do is fill a little shot glass, put a little bit of water in it, and pull off some of this Milliput, because as you can see I've added water and it's acting like a plaster at the moment, and it's getting all over my fingers, which is absolutely fine. You can clean yourself up afterwards. And I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to mash it up with a cocktail stick to turn it into more of a toothpaste consistency, or more of a gel. That's sort of what you want to be going for. So basically I'm just going to mash that in there for a minute, and once that's done, then we'll move on to the next step. But as you can see, it starts in parts, but the more you mash that together, the more pasty it gets, and it becomes really sticky. At this point, after I've done that, I'm just using an old paintbrush. As you can see, I'm hoping it shows up. It's quite pasty. And what we're going to do is basically we're going to dab that into the crevice. Do not worry about getting it on the other parts of the model at the moment, because it's actually really easy to clean up. So we're going to dab that over that crease. If it's raised up a little bit higher than it should be, don't worry about that. Although this model's quite awkward to get in there because of his tassels hanging off of his jacket. It sometimes takes more than one coat. It's probably the best way to do it. But just dabbing that in there, and then what we're going to do in a sec is we're going to take a cotton bud, or just add some extra water to the brush, and then just wash away all the remainder of that plaster. So all that's left is the milliput in the gaps. Make sure your cotton bud or Q-tip, if you're in America, is wet. Otherwise you'll pull these strands of hair off of it and get that on your model. But if it's wet, it seems to respond really well with the milliput. So this means that you can just clean it straight off like that, and it also won't dig the milliput out of the groove that you've put it in. So you can use this nice soft surface to just smooth that in there and make sure it's nice and flush. And now we're going to move on to using superglue on metal models and pinning, and also cleaning metal models, which is very similar to working with the plastics, although you're going to need different files. The techniques are pretty similar, to be honest. Now this model's pretty cool. There's two of these in that box set, so me and Andy are going to paint one each but differently. They'll be coming out in a later tutorial. Again, I'm dry fitting all the pieces of the model and checking what goes where. And this time we're going to be just using super glue. Plastic glue is going to be absolutely useless with this model. The super glue we're using, by the way, is not some expensive Games Workshop super glue. We get 5 or 6 tubes of that for £1 from the pound shop. And the first thing we're going to have to do here is pin this tail in, because it may have a place to pin it in, but you want your bond as strong as possible. There's nothing worse than finishing a model off, having it painted really well, especially a metal model, having the part that you've put in pop off because it's not got a strong enough join to it. Now this little peg here, I'm sure, is supposed to go into the back of this, or it could be a bit of the sprue. But you want to check the size of it with the size of your drill bit. Now I know this drill bit is the same size as my paper clips, but it's good practice before you drill anything to check that your paper clips and your drill bit size match up. It's surprising how often a paper clip will be a slightly different size, so you want to make sure you get a snug fit. There is a guide hole in this particular model for me to drill through, so I'm just going to crack on with drilling straight through that. But if there isn't one, I'd recommend marking where you're going to drill with a hobby knife and just pushing that in to make a dent. That way your drill won't slip around, which is something that used to happen when I was a beginner trying to drill into something, and it just slip around and you end up drilling the wrong place. But if you just push your hobby knife, make an X or a small circle, and then just drill into that, it'll stop it slipping around. I want this hole in the back of the wolf to be decent depth, because we're going to glue the paper clip on the inside as well as the inside of the tail, and that's going to make a solid piece that runs through both of them. What I did with the tail here was I cut that little part off and then drilled through where that part was into the tail. Now that's just going to add more support and stop it snapping off once we've built this. And as always, when working with super glue, try not to stick yourself to absolutely everything. That happens to everybody, by the way, so you glue yourself to something, you're not alone. We all do that. It's very easy to do. But what I like to do with my super glue, so I can keep in control, sorry it's not on camera here, I just make a blob on a plastic surface and then use the end of my cocktail stick to get that. And this way you can keep in control of your super glue rather than using the entire tube, running the risk of too much coming out. So as you can see, that's a nice little blob on there. And obviously before you try and glue this, you wanted to make sure that your paper clip fit and it went deep enough in there. Again, it's just dry fitting the model. And then just be patient and let it set. It shouldn't take too long really. Don't wiggle it around to see if it's set fully. I tend to glue something like this and then leave it for a few minutes and do something else. So while that's fully setting, I'm going to clean up this arm. As you can see, there's some obvious sprue parts here from the flashing, and then there's this big sprue bit. So that's going to need cutting off and filing down. So what I'm going to do now is use my old Snips, which as you can see there's a lot of gaps and dints in the blades from cutting metals, as the clippers are strong but they do wear out over time. So just keep those separate. Having two different pairs you will find useful, as you want to use one for cutting metals, paper clips, and one for cutting plastic. Again, you want to get that as flush to the model as you can by pushing down against it before you make the cut. But if you think you're going to cut into the model, or it's a big part like this, leave a small amount remaining, and that way you can file that off to the right shape and size. And at this point we're going to have to switch to a metal file, as the nail files won't work. I'm pretty sure Games Workshop do sell metal files. I'm not sure where Andy got this one from. We're going to use the exact same technique here. We're going to go round in a small circle with the fine end of this file. As it's on a muscle texture as well, I have to be even more careful to try and get that smooth. You may need to file some of the actual texture down itself, as there's a lot less control using a metal file compared to a plastic file. Now with this particular model, it has large pegs in the holes. It has large pegs to attach the arms, so I'm just going to use the super glue straight from the tub. I'm going to be very gentle while applying that. I'm going to try and apply as little as possible, because you don't want to flood that peg. When you put it on and the other half of the peg fills, all that glue is going to come out. So just be sparing with it. Try and aim for less than you need. You can always move it around with a cocktail stick on the inside to cover more of the surface. And again, same with the plastics. We're just going to let that sit and bond for a couple of seconds, and it should be fine after that. Now this is bonded fully, so it's time to take the paper clip and finish off our pinning. Again, we're going to have to dry fit. You don't want to just cut that bit off and try and glue it, so it doesn't quite fit. The paper clip's a little bit too long. So my options here are to cut down the paper clip or to drill into that hole a little bit more. And what I chose to do was just cut a little bit more off that paper clip. You want as much paper clip in the two parts as possible. That's what's going to form the bond, and that's what's going to stop them snapping off. We're going to use the same super glue technique that we used before, except this time I'm applying it with a cocktail stick to the back hole. As you can see, that'll now fit nice and snug in there, and that paper clip will add that extra support, so that'll be nicely pinned once that's bonded. Whereas if there was no pin in it, that would just be hanging there freely and it would snap off really, really easy, which is not something you want when you're building your models. Right, now to slowly finish off this video, we're coming back to the plastic model just to show you how the milliput's gone. After a little bit of cleanup and a bit of filing, what we're going to do now is just add a layer of paint. I prefer to use primer myself. The reason for that is the surface is white and grey, so it makes it hard for the eyes to pick up whether or not that gap's completely full. But if we take a second to water down some primer and paint over that gap, once it's all black, the eyes will then be able to pick that up a hell of a lot easier than it would do the way it is now. I choose primer, and it's Vallejo primer. The reason for that is it dries very flat to the surface, so if there is any gaps left, it will show up. And if there is a gap left, don't worry, you can just add some more milliput over the primer. This primer dries so tight to the surface that you won't notice it anyway once you prime the whole model. and once that's dry, I'm able to see what's what with the model. Now that's a lot smoother than it was. Got rid of most of that gap there. And the only bit of gap that's left showing is a bit that's going to be covered with his gun and everything else anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. I think this model's almost ready to get primed and done for a tutorial for a Thursday. So I hope that helps you guys. I tried to cover all the basics of model building in this one video. If it did help you out, definitely hit like, hit subscribe, and share with all your friends as well. We have some special thank yous from the channel to our patrons. We have Cliff Leonard, Joe Spearpoint, Laurel Tarley, Ludwig Hofbauer, Warren Brunsdon, Danny Wack, and Chris Lindquist. They're our patrons. They help pay for these models and support our channel. If you want to join them on Patreon, where you get early access to all our other videos, links are in the description. Big thank you to The Outpost, where we buy our models from. Brand new models at a second-hand price. If you follow the affiliate link down below in the description and order stuff from there, we get store credit so we can buy even more models for the studio for more painting tutorials. And that's all from me. Part 4 will be coming soon, and thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.